Seppuku is a familiar scene in films and series about Japanese warfare. In many war dramas, Japanese officers who've suffered defeat will kneel down, grip a short dagger wrapped in cloth, and plunge it into their abdomen, turning it 90 degrees to make a deep cut across their belly. This ritual often raises questions. Why do they stab vertically only to turn the blade, rather than simply cutting horizontally? And why did Japanese warriors hold seppuku in such high regard? In this video, we'll delve into the history of seppuku in Japan and uncover why samurai saw this brutal act as a path to honor. Seppuku was considered a unique form of suicide among samurai, symbolizing the essence of Bushido, the way of the warrior, which upheld beauty in tragic death, like cherry blossoms drifting to the ground. Through seppuku, samurai exhibited their fearlessness, a virtue deeply revered in Japan for over 1,000 years. Historically, seppuku wasn't an exclusive ritual for samurai, nor was it a purely noble ceremony. Seppuku is believed to have originated in 989 CE, when a notorious bandit, Fujiwara no Yoshi, took his own life by cutting open his abdomen during a standoff with government soldiers. In a shocking act, he tore out his organs and hurled them at his captors before collapsing in death. Although horrifying, his courage struck those present, and over time, this manner of death was celebrated as an act of bravery. Inspired by Yoshi, some Japanese even began to revere seppuku as a testament to true courage. According to the Hagen Monogatari, the first samurai known to commit seppuku was Minamoto no Tamatomo, who died in 1170 after suffering defeat. Seppuku as an accepted custom began to flourish under the Kamakura shogunate, 1185 to 1333. Warriors who lost battles or faced impending capture often chose seppuku as a way to preserve their honor, demonstrating that they would rather die as heroes than live as cowards. In the Taihiki, a chronicle from the 14th century, over 2,600 samurai suicides are recorded, with around 2,100 of those by seppuku. By the Sengoku, warring states, period, some samurai even took their lives to honor their lords, following them into death. During the Edo period, the shogunate institutionalized seppuku, transforming it into a formalized, structured ritual. Samurai were permitted to perform seppuku for crimes, as it was considered a more honorable way to die compared to other punishments, preserving their dignity and reputation. As the ritual became more ceremonial, different cutting styles emerged, including the single horizontal cut, ikemanji bara, diagonal cuts, and even the three-character cuts, which were physically extreme and challenging. Samurai adhered to specific rules when performing seppuku. They had to avoid making the incision too deep or allowing their intestines to spill, as failing to maintain poise was considered dishonorable. Additionally, seppuku required that the warrior fall forward upon death, not backward, as lying face-up was seen as improper. Since abdominal wounds are rarely fatal, seppuku was an agonizing process, and the warrior would often endure excruciating pain before succumbing to blood loss. Some accounts, such as the Gikiki, claimed that Minamoto no Yoshitsune, after a failed rebellion, inflicted multiple cuts upon himself before finally bleeding to death, even pausing to clean his blade mid-act. With the long and painful nature of seppuku, a secondary role emerged in the Edo period. An assistant, or kaishakunin, armed with a long sword, would end the suffering by swiftly decapitating the samurai after the initial abdominal cut. The warring states period in mainstream thought at the time, the act of seppuku held a certain grandeur primarily because it demonstrated a samurai's endurance of pain and disdain for death. Initially, the kaishakunin, the attendant or second who assisted in seppuku, had a simple role: to confirm the samurai's death. Sometimes, they also checked the expressions of those ordered to die by suicide. If a dead person's expression was distorted in pain, like sticking out the tongue or wide-eyed, they would carve a cross into the sole of the deceased's foot to mark the dishonor. This practice was strict, to say the least. During the Edo period, however, as seppuku became increasingly ritualized and varied in form, Enduring such an excruciating death became harder for the person performing it. Thus, the kaishikinin began aiding the samurai by beheading them if they could no longer withstand the pain. Generally, 2 to 3 friends or relatives would serve as kaishikinin. Apart from the main kaishiku responsible for the beheading, there was an assistant to prepare the seppuku blade, and another assistant to examine the body. The main kaishiku held the most important role, as beheading itself required skill. A skilled kaishiku would often leave a small flap of flesh connecting the head to the body to prevent a complete separation, a technique called kubibikuro. Hence, kaishikinin became quite skilled, with master executioners earning considerable respect. One famous example occurred on November 25, 1970, when Yukio Mishima, the author of The Temple of the Golden Pavilion and The Sea of Fertility, a man deeply obsessed with Bushido, staged a failed rebellion with the Japan Self-Defense Forces, demanding they follow him in a coup. Realizing he was alone in his call to action, Mishima committed seppuku before a shocked audience. His kaishiku, unfortunately, lacked the necessary skill, and despite 3 attempts with a renowned blade, failed to end Mishima's pain, reducing the solemn event to a tragic farce. In shame, the kaishiku eventually took his own life as well, underscoring the risks involved in performing this role. Records show that as time went on, the kaishiku's role became more important. By the Edo period, seppuku had become so painful that people often couldn't bear it. Yet to scream in pain during seppuku was seen as a disgrace. Thus, mock seppuku gained popularity, allowing samurai to preserve the outward appearance of honor while sparing them some pain. This practice, called fan seppuku, involves symbolically making a cutting motion with a wooden sword or fan across the abdomen, with the kaishiku stepping in to complete the act without even breaking the skin. By the late Edo period, some samurai would even take poison to die, only for the kaishiku to step in posthumously to ensure appearances. For example, in the famous Akio incident, 47 samurai were ordered to commit seppuku, but in reality, they were beheaded, even as officials announced to the public that they had performed seppuku.so. Knowing that seppuku was excruciatingly painful, why did Japanese samurai choose it? Was it truly, as some claim, a way to express the Bushido spirit, a valorization of death, as if the abdomen housed the soul? Did they believe that bearing their gut meant exposing their true virtuous spirit, as if to say, yes, I may have killed, oppressed, or lost battles, but I have an honest and noble soul? In reality, ideals like loyalty, honor, and the pursuit of death central to Bushido have little to do with actual samurai history. Not only was Bushido a relatively recent concept, but historically, samurai often overthrew the very lords they served. For instance, famous samurai like Tado Takatora and Date Masamune, renowned as lords of valor, served numerous masters. During the Kamakura and Warring States periods, samurai merely upheld the bonds of loyalty between master and servant. Only in the Edo period did concepts like compassion and loyalty gain importance. Bushido's core tenets of honor and loyalty, and death as a point of pride, were later products of Japan's modernization, promoted as a blend of blind loyalty and obedience. Seppuku, in the end, was simply a fashionable ritual that evolved into an accepted form of suicide or punishment. Samurai chose seppuku for honor. Doing so won the respect of others, boosting the reputation of family and friends. Failing to perform it meant being labeled a coward, bringing shame to family, and leaving their descendants with no future prospects. That's all there was to it. Seppuku, a cultural phenomenon. Seppuku, or ritual suicide, became a cultural phenomenon in Japan. But let's break down why it was especially common among samurai and how the Japanese have historically approached the concept of suicide. Seppuku has 2 straightforward steps, almost as simple as the old joke about fitting an elephant into a fridge. Step 1: commit suicide. Now, it's not that samurai were particularly enamored with the idea of killing themselves. Rather, the inclination towards suicide is more widespread within Japanese culture. According to Japan's 2017 White Paper on Suicide Prevention, Japan ranks 6th in global suicide rates, just after Lithuania, South Korea, Suriname, Slovenia, and Hungary. Among developed nations, Japan has the highest suicide rate and is the only country where suicide rates exceed those of accidental deaths. South Korea, classified as a developed country in 2021, is the only country with a comparable rate. Studies show that the Japanese language has an extensive vocabulary dedicated to suicide, much of which originated from Chinese, but has since fallen out of use in modern Chinese, while these terms continue in Japanese. Based on classification, there are over 60 terms in Japanese specifically related to suicide, divided into categories like individual suicide, double suicide, war-related suicide, and attempted suicide. This linguistic phenomenon reflects Japan's long-standing cultural reverence for suicide. Some scholars argue that Japanese culture carries two significant beliefs. First, everyone is indebted to others. Second, death solves all problems. Combined, these imply that if you cause trouble, death might be the solution. Emil Durkheim, in his theory of suicide, observed that unlike the predominantly self-centered motives behind Western suicides, many Japanese suicides align with altruistic motives. For instance, the karoshi, death from overwork, cases in Japanese corporations could be seen as acts of loyalty-driven suicide. Given that many Japanese conglomerates trace back to the feudal era, when the nobility and samurai clans transitioned into these corporate dynasties, the samurai's mindset around suicide resonates to this day. As for why samurai chose seppuku, the ritual of disembowelment, this practice ties back to Japan's beliefs surrounding vengeful spirits. In Japanese folklore, anger and resentment accumulate in one's abdomen, and if these feelings linger, they form vengeful spirits that attach to the dead body, wreaking havoc. Seppuku, by cutting open the abdomen, symbolically and practically releases the spirit, preventing it from lingering and seeking revenge. Additionally, samurai facing defeat chose seppuku because it was a guaranteed, unmistakable method to demonstrate they took their own lives rather than being killed by others. With such an evident abdominal wound, there would be no doubt about the samurai's honorable choice to die by his own hand. In summary, while seppuku is often seen as a unique cultural expression of samurai spirit, it was more often a last resort, an imposed act of honorable death rather than a freely chosen one. Its beautification during the Edo period doesn't erase the reality that it was often a grisly, barbaric custom rooted in coercion and fear of dishonor. Far from embodying lofty ideals, seppuku represents a tragic adherence to a code that prized a perverse sense of honor, upheld by a culture that could not face failure or disgrace. Alright, that's it for today's video. See you next time.